Welcome, everybody. Today, we're going to be talking about mastering aviation risk, UPRT integration, and safety solutions. We have a wonderful guest. We have Sonny Bates, who's the CEO of Wyvern. Today, we're going to be talking about UPRT implementation to mitigate the risk of loss of control in flight and the cost of not doing so. But most importantly, 3 key actions for you to take to start the process of mastering aviation risk. Let's get right to it. Well, let's go ahead and bring Sonny in right away. Sonny, great to have you here with us today. And just tell everybody where you're coming in from. Where's your home office there?
Oh, thanks, BJ, for having me today. Great to be here. I'm located in southern New Hampshire, Nashua, actually, and our home office is really right across the street from the Nashua airport. It's a very busy little airport at times with a business jet. Used to have quite a bit of flight school activity. That's building back up.
Awesome. Great. Well, why don't we go ahead, and I'd just like to talk a little bit about your background here, Sonny, before we get into it too far. So for today, we're going to be going through introductions, then safety alignment on risk mitigation, and then we're going to be talking about the process of mastering aviation risk. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation. And interesting in there, we're going to show a Delta study where they did effectively mitigate and reduce the risk of loss of control pretty dramatically. And then we'll go ahead and go through the rest of that on comprehensively mitigating it. Now, our featured guest today is Sonny. And Sonny is really, truly, I would consider the world leading expert when it comes to safety management system implementation and the services offered by Wyvern. And they truly, you can see by his background and his qualifications, it came about by a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of hard work. Sonny, so I'm curious, first off, how long have you been at Wyvern? And also maybe what's always interesting to the folks online is how do you feel your past, whether that's your time at IBAC or your education, has prepared you for your position as CEO at Wyvern?
Thanks, BJ. Very kind of you to introduce me like that. I think, I've been at Wyvern for, it'll be 7 years in January. And if I could offer any kind of career advice to anybody, always consider that what you're doing is a part of the building block in your career and your personal and professional life without really knowing. And we can never really know what's next. And I never thought I'd be CEO of Wyvern. Always thought maybe I wanted to be a director of aviation of a corporate flight department, maybe something like that. But as my career just unfolded in front of me and I pursued my passion of safety risk management and professionalism, those two came together in a way that's like, well, I'm at IBAC now. This is a great opportunity. I'll run with the APS-WYVERN program as long as I feel like it's good to do that. And then when I left the APS-WYVERN program, I walked around in the forest for a little while trying to figure out how I wanted to reinvent myself. And I still stayed on that pure pursuit of safety risk management and professionalism, how those come together. And I received a phone call one day and the owner of Wyvern said, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you." And here I am. So I would have never, that wasn't my projected career path. If you asked me 10 years ago if I would be doing this, I'd probably say, no, I don't think so. But I love what I do. It's just a natural evolution.
Awesome. Very, very cool, Sonny. And I think it always manifests in your perspective that you bring based on not only your experience from IBAC and the military and leadership roles, but from your academic background as well, kind of bringing it all together. It's kind of interesting how that always leads us to where we are. Wherever we're at, the path that led us here, usually every step mattered in the process. It does. So, my background, of course, at Aviation Performance Solutions is over 25 years now, really specializing in professional pilot upset training, and similarly from the military, spending time in the area of operations that our customers operate in, the crewed environment, in the single pilot environment, has been really instrumental in having a passion about this. So I don't want to spend too much time on me, because I want to focus really on what we're here today, which is talking about helping pilots bring everyone home safely. So I'm just going to talk briefly about APS, and then Sunny's going to give an overview of Wyvern and who they are. But essentially at APS, right on the front of our door above our main entrance, it says, "We help pilots bring everyone home safely." And our brand promise is simply every pilot trained in control all the time. From there, we have a mission, and this is going to give a great opportunity to bring Wyvern into the picture. Our mission is simply this, is to crush the threat of loss of control in flight globally by partnering with safety champions to accelerate the adoption of life-saving APS upset training. So we consider Wyvern one of our cherished partners in doing this, and truly a safety champion to be out in the industry and really being in the field and helping organizations be all that they can be. And those that want to be better and to grow and evolve, that's exactly what Wyvern accomplishes, which is a direct marriage with what we do at APS. So, Sunny, I'm going to go over to you for Wyvern, but before we do that, thank you guys for having been with us for many, many years, and I'm excited at Base coming up next week in Las Vegas for us to continue that with our booths beside each other.
Yeah, that's great. I look forward to the same, BJ. And, our partnership has just been a wonderful blessing to us at Wyvern and to many people out in the industry. I think the way that you approach loss control in flight and prevention of that is just phenomenal. And it really blends in well with our holistic approach of safety risk management. When I came on board Wyvern, I came on board with this passion to do it differently. Do it differently from what? Well, my background came from a very rigid set of principles with auditing and things like that from IBAC and ISBEO. And you need those rigid principles and processes to make an ethical audit experience. But then I also realized that from my military background, you also need coaching, and you need mentors, and you need help more often than every 2 years. And I wanted to develop that at Wyvern, and we did with the Flight Leader program. And so we have the every 90-day coaching engagement in the Flight Leader program to keep people on path to excellence. So you had that slide up there. Our mission is to elevate aviation safety worldwide, and we literally do that on all continents. And our vision is to ensure that every operator has an effective SMS. It's not good enough just to have an SMS on the shelf, or an SMS that you use sometimes, or maybe even an SMS you use all the time, but it's ill-focused. You need an effective SMS. So that's our vision. And our values, we really believe that professionalism is paramount, in everything we do. Without professionalism, how can you have a really healthy culture? Without professionalism, how can you have a really successful business? And so innovation is part of it. We need to keep evolving every day, and relationships are what brings it all together. So we have some brand promises there too, but in a nutshell, we commit to big company processes, but we maintain small company response.
I love it. It's always, when we first, many years ago, when we first started working on what we call our vision, which is kind of our purpose, values, and mission, we kind of made it a marketing tool. In other words, something that we thought people would want to know about APS. And while that was fine, it fundamentally failed because of the fact what we want our mission to be is exactly who we are and what we do, and how we do it in alignment with our core values. And I think what you have here represents who Wyvern is. And what we have found is that not only does it attract the right team members, it also attracts the right customers that share in those values. It's not so much about what you do, but why you do it that people buy into. And really, when its core alignment is around safety, and you can see safety throughout your statement here, it really speaks to the motivation behind the organization. So, when I talk about kind of a wonderful marriage together in safety, I think that's where it all brings together. You can see the parallels between your approach to positioning Wyvern as well as APS.
Definitely.
Anything you want to add to that, Sonny?
No, just that I said no, then I have to say something. But I think it goes back to one of my favorite sayings: what you do is important, but how you do it is more important.
Yeah.
So we're both in the business of, elevating safety. You do it very focused at APS in such a professional and profound way, and we do it our way in a more holistic fashion.
Excellent. Well, now to bring it in perspective to our topic today, this is the most recent airline information here that came out just very recently. This is from 2014 to 2023. And you can see that it's pretty stark in that big column on the left, which we'll talk about. We also are going to talk about really the Wyvern core customer base. And this shape of the curve here that you see pretty much is the same across any cross section of the aviation industry you looked at, certainly in fixed wing aviation. But we're gonna show that loss of control in flight here is a pretty dramatic threat. Now, while it's rare, it's almost always catastrophic and fatal. And so in this particular case, you can see for the air carriers, it's gone from 44% of all fatalities up to 66% of all fatalities. So it's usually quite substantial. Now, here's the crude Part 135 operations from the NTSB. This is also from 2014 to 2023. And in this particular case, you can see it shows a number of items. It shows accidents, then fatal accidents, and then fatalities. We always rank in accordance with fatalities to identify the severity of the threat. And this group, you can see 43% of their fatalities are loss of control related as well. So what we're going to talk about today on the topic of mastering aviation risk is how do we as an industry drive down this completely unnecessary risk to safety. And it's really going to take a paradigm shift. And the reason why I always say a paradigm shift, it's not a word I throw around loosely. We need to understand that those big red bars are established by the existing training system. It is a result and outcome of the way the industry trains. And it's not personal, it's not individual pilots, it's the training system itself that has found this area of mitigation very difficult and very complex to go after. So it's not a simple solution. Unfortunately, Sonny and I were talking yesterday that for every complex problem, there's a very clear, simple solution that is wrong. And we see that all the time where people say, if you could just eliminate distraction, you can eliminate loss of control in flight. And as we actually look at hazard identification, we can see that distraction is only one of 21 hazards that have a potential outcome or risk of loss of control in flight. So it really takes a comprehensive mitigation and has to focus on preparing the pilot. And we're going to talk about how you do that to make a pilot not only resilient to loss of control, but just resilient across the board as core competencies to just be safer in every single flight, just not when they're exposed to an airplane upset. Sonny, any comments on this graph?
No, well done.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. All right, so this is kind of the core of what you do here, Sonny. So the functional components of SMS we can see of safety policy, risk management, assurance, and promotion. And you can see the safety risk management element is what we're talking about here today. And the safety risk management process, which I've learned in maybe more detail than I ever thought I would based on our relationship here with Sonny, is what that process looks like. So I want to pause here, Sonny, for you to talk about this because I know it's really central to Wyvern and the deep understanding that you install with your customers, that how they take control of this process, and you're there to really help them through that. In fact, you and I didn't even mention it, but APS is now a Wyvern wingman
Yes.
organization, so I'm excited about that. But Sonny, do you want to comment on this because this is kind of really central to Wyvern, I assume.
Yeah, it certainly is. And, everybody knows anything about SMS. There's the 4 components and the 12 elements. And the 4 components, you have them there on the left. Really what we're here for is that second component, safety risk management. The first component, policy, says we're going to do this. It shows leadership's commitment, all these promises through policy letters and stuff like that. It's a must. But it promotes the fact that we're going to do safety risk management. Safety assurance says, hey, we did safety risk management. Let's prove it was effective, right? But safety risk management is still the core activity. This is what we got to do, folks. And then safety promotion is just that. It's like, hey, we got to ensure we have a culture here, and we have to have the training and education to make sure we can do what? Safety risk management. So it really is all about that. And I see too many times organizations think they have a very effective SMS with the 4 components, but they spend a lot of time on safety assurance doing internal audits. They spend a lot of time doing training and education. That's all great, and really nice policies and things like that. But they do very little safety risk management that's meaningful. They have like just reports coming in that are ad hoc that really aren't that focused on what's killing us out there. And that's the point. I love talking with BJ and APS. They're focused on the things that are killing people out there. And that really needs to be part of everybody's strategic design for their SMS. The Flight Safety Foundation lists 11 things that kill people in aviation, and one of those is loss control in flight. If you're not listing those 11 things in your SMS and saying, I'm going after these: collision on the ground, collision on the air, loss control in flight, fuel contamination, I won't list all 11 of them, but there's 11 basic things that kill us. And so you need to have those in your SMS. That's why I absolutely love talking with BJ about these things. And then, of course, when you get into safety risk management, you need to identify those hazards. There's usually multiple hazards associated with a singular risk, and then do that assessment. Take steps to reduce that risk, and then ask yourself at the end, do I accept this residual risk? If not, you got more work to do.
And I love, Sonny, your slides coming up are going to talk about that kind of unique approach to that, as to what the risks are and what the cost of not mitigating it could be to an organization, to just find another way to give perspective to operators out there. So we're going to get to that in just a few minutes. One of the things that we had talked about, and we've talked about before, but also yesterday and even this morning, is that we find that when you go after those sources of fatalities, like loss of control, like collision on the ground, mid-airs, for example, is another one, is what ends up happening. That training not only mitigates that particular risk, but it overall improves the pilot's competency across the board. We see that with the air carriers that we license. They see that when they install a really robust upset training program, it permeates the entire organization and the entire training plan, and it's skills and knowledge and mitigations that they apply every single day on every single flight, just not when an airplane upset occurs. Okay. Anything to add there, Sonny, before we jump into this?
No, that's good.
All right. So mastering aviation risk, this is what we're going to talk about. And the good news, I believe, all the tools to mastering aviation risk exist already in the industry. Now, the other thing I will say is I think that mastering is not a destination, it is a process, because while we strive for excellence, we strive for perfection, I think by the very nature of aviation risk, we're probably never going to achieve it. We want to continually strive to accomplish it. Do you think that's a fair assessment, Sonny? Do you feel like you can arrive at mastering aviation risk, or do you see that more as an ongoing, lifelong process?
No, it definitely is the ongoing, lifelong process. If you're talking about just anything on the basically the safety culture journey, it's the same thing. You never really achieve a safety culture and you can have that party and say, we finally did it, we have that safe culture. It is a continual journey. There's too much change going on. Change happens every day, and new threats happen, pop up on a daily, maybe weekly, monthly basis, whatever. But the world changes, and we need to keep stepping it up our game.
Absolutely. Let's start with the first one, because I think this is something you mentioned earlier. In fact, it's part of your WYVERN's mission, really, is the first step here is we have an effective and active safety management system. And that's, and what is your philosophy on that, Sonny? I know you've shared it a little bit already, but my feeling is that that can't be an assumption that you have that. I think that needs to be validated and reassessed in an ongoing basis.
Absolutely. So, one of the first things I look at when I'm visiting an operator and they want to show their SMS, I'll say, hey, can you give me your list of hazards and what you're doing about them? And sometimes that might be a little bit too technical or engineering focused, which is how ICAO describes and FAA describes the SMS. They go, well, we don't really have it described like that. I'm like, that's okay. Maybe a different way. Can you show me a table or a list of things that you focus on here that you consider are your highest risks? If they're unable to do that, then it's like, okay, so how do you share this with anybody, right? How do you share this internally with the people that you new hires coming in saying, look, you're working now in an environment where we have identified these as the elevated risks, and here's what we do about them. So these are one of the things, and I would expect, as I said earlier, that loss control for flight operations, loss control in flight is one of the identified risks.
Yeah, and when we bring people in for our evaluation, which we welcome everybody, get yourself to Arizona. We'll bring you in and tour you. There's no charge for that. To see what we do is we take them through that risk process, and they're shocked when they look at it, especially if they're decision makers, saying, "How come I haven't seen this before? Nor have I looked at the severity and likelihood of loss of control in flight. It never occurred to me that it was so severe, not let alone being the most severe risk that we face from a severity and likelihood standpoint." So this kind of brings us to the targeted safety risk management process, and it kind of is fundamentally based on identifying a hazard that you want to assess and then mitigate. Is that a fair assessment, Sonny? I think that's kind of a follow-on to what you were saying. If they haven't identified the risk and taking action to mitigate them, they're kind of it's kind of more of an SMS on the shelf, so to speak.
Yeah, that's for sure. You know, every operator is expected to, at least typically on an annual basis, brainstorm, look at what they do, look where they do it, consider their operations and the equipment they use to do the operations, the manpower and everything, the whole equation, so to speak, and say, okay, these are our higher or our elevated risk areas, and this is what we need to do about them. From there, they create objectives like, okay, we will know we're successful mitigating these risks if. So they create these safety objectives, and from that, they then create the safety performance indicators. It's much like quality, you know, quality KPIs, and safety, it's SPIs. So in this blue area you're talking about, I imagine where the SPIs are now identified, that focused effort to do those important things. Now, you might have loss control in flight identified as an SPI, but maybe not. But the point is, in this blue area, you still identify these things that are your elevated risk areas, and what you are doing about them, whether you indicate them as an SP or not. You know, that's is maybe more technique.
So, and I kind of like this diagram, Sonny, is that the core of this is the effective active SMS, but an outcropping of that is the targeted SRM process that you talked about. And a little bit later, I'm going to give everybody a QR code, which is a 30-minute video from Delta Airlines, where they essentially give a master class on how they approach this and how they mitigate those risks and make operational decisions from that. Okay, next step, and I've grayed out the APS elements because we're going to get to those later. I want to focus really on the Wyvern components of this. So ongoing SMS evolution, fine tuning and auditing, Sonny. I wish I could represent this as a circle, because I think these contained circles are great, but it really is an ongoing process where mastering aviation risk is an endless cycle, so to speak. How would you comment on the fine tuning and auditing that you haven't mentioned already?
Yeah, well, you know, the auditing typically includes the internal and external auditing. But one thing I like to caution any of our clients, and our clients hopefully to be that are not yet, we say, you know, internal auditing is something that should not just keep you busy. It should be focused on what you believe are the elevated risk areas. You know, one thing I can't stand hearing about and seeing is people saying, well, our staff is limited, we don't have too much time, all this safety effort takes a lot of time and effort. Of course it does. So why keep yourself busy? Look at the elevated risk areas and focus your internal auditing energies on those. And so, you know, too many times people use like a 500 element item checklist, and they say, hey, we have to get through this every year. That's our internal audit program, and it becomes rote and meaningless. Instead, you could focus on these killer items and make sure these things don't happen, or at least you have control of them anyway.
Well, I like, that's very insightful, Sonny. I think here is that, you know, people coming to this presentation looking for the silver bullet. Well, the silver bullets are out there and they exist through the SMS process. But I think the key word on that slide, it says key stages, but specifically action steps. To your point, Sonny, there's energy that needs to be invested in this process, and it needs to be something that the organization takes upon themselves to keep live and effective. All right. So, Sonny, over to you and your slides. I'll advance them. And I just love this approach you've taken on the cost of not managing risk. So over to you, Sonny. And at the end of it, yeah, everybody probably noticed how I grayed out the upset training, the UPRT integration elements. I'm going to get to that after Sonny has done this. I really want to get here first. So, Sonny, did you want to introduce this or just jump right in?
Yeah, I think I'll just jump right in. So you can go to the next slide. I want to use an example here. This was based on a true story, and it never really made it in any of the data that was fed into the FAA or ICAO. So again, this is an example of a lot of things are happening out there that are not reported, and the FAA does not really become aware of, nor ICAO. But here's what happened: ATC asked the flight crew to increase their climb rate for conflicting traffic. At that moment, the crew has this ability to say unable. Which they probably should have done at this point. But instead, they spun the Mach to the minimum Mach number for climb according to the airplane flight manual and hit flight level change, and the airplane pitched up. Very soon after that, they hit head on the jet stream, and the airplane sensed the need to pitch up even more. And it was such a drastic pitch up that the autopilot disengaged. The aircraft went into a stall situation, rolled and pitched. The pilot did not even expect this to happen. Who would have, right? And they aggravated the situation. And after a bunch of, I guess, ugly attempts to recover, they finally did. Landed, and I'm sure the passengers thought, I will never fly with that company again, right? So just a little insight there. And this kind of stuff happens probably more often than people are aware of. Next slide. So, when we look at risk analysis, part of it is looking at the assessment of the risk and the likelihood and severity. And your table should be customized to your company. This is just an example table. You'll see later that BJ uses another table that's slightly different than this. But for this specific situation where the aircraft went into a stall situation around flight level 290 when it hit the jet stream, as a minimum, that was a severity and a likelihood that put us at least in the moderate. No one got hurt. They could have. The aircraft wasn't damaged, but it was all very close to, it could have been a catastrophic situation had they gone into a spin or such a deep stall that they couldn't recover from. So that was initial risk analysis or assessment. Go ahead to the next slide, BJ. The mitigation strategy for this company was to cover these risks related to using different flight control modes in the climb. They realized that flight level change may not be the only mode that they should or could use in all situations. So they split that up and broke that down into more enhanced training opportunity for their pilots. They developed and clarified procedures related to briefings, pre-flight briefings, looking at the flight plans and indicating where on the flight plans they anticipate wind shear or maybe even the jet stream, so they can be more aware of it, because the pilots in this case were just totally oblivious to where the jet stream was, or even thinking about the possibility of a very strong wind shear in that climb. So situational awareness was a big part. Developing lessons learned, and they made those a required read in their SMS, and that was a good thing. And then, but the biggest thing they did here that had more sustaining effect was requiring, at least the idea of having all pilots complete UPRT. Now, how this actually plays out, I don't know, but these are the possibilities and some of the mitigation strategies this operator considered. Next. Now, when you look at applying risk mitigation strategies to a situation or a risk, and then you look back to see, well, okay, we've done something. Has that reduced the risk? In this case, the operator could argue, well, we have reduced the probability because now we're more aware. We're not going to use flight level change to the degree we used to. We use different modes as appropriate. We won't use minimum Mach in a climb, and our pilots will be more aware of where the jet stream is and other wind shear events. So we have reduced that likelihood of happening down a notch. And so now the operator can, make the argument that they're in the low, the green, and now this risk can be accepted. And so that's what it looks like in a quick academic sense or theoretical sense anyway for risk analysis. You have the initial risk and the residual risk. But the next slide, we can talk about that. So you reduce the risk from 15 to 10, let's say, on a quantitative scale, 33%. Well, that's great, but what does that mean, right? Are you saving money? Can you make a case that, when it comes to investing dollars, you're going to get a return on that investment? And one quick story I want to share with you in that regard. When I worked for the Boeing C-17 program office as the safety program manager, we had a situation where we could lose an aircraft if a certain size bird hit above the windscreen at a certain area and it would damage the overhead panel. And the failure mode was all 4 engines shut down, and you lose the aircraft. And we ran quantitative analysis to see what the risk was. And quantitatively, we could never get to a number that says we need to take action. And so we took this to the program director, general officer, and General Johnson said, we need to look at this in a qualitative way because this is still unacceptable. If you can't drive a number quantitatively that says we need to take action, certainly qualitatively, we need to do something, because we cannot let a 6 or 8 pound bird destroy an aircraft and all the crew on board, And so that's when I really start thinking about qualitative analysis. So next slide, BJ. When we look at the cost of not managing the risk, to General Johnson's point for the C-17, in this case, for a business jet, let's say a mid-sized business jet, $20 million, 7 people on board. When you look at how insurance agencies or underwriters look at the value of a life, and this is not to, say that this is my or APS's take on the value of a life. This is just rough computing just to make a point. But, some insurance companies can say in a rough figure, it could be $3 million a person or higher. But if you take 3 times 7, there's 21 million there. You have collateral damage on the ground and otherwise. You have psychological damage to survivors. You have damage to your brand. So, for these reasons, part of the Wyvern standard is we require operators to have at least $50 million in insurance coverage for small jets. For medium-sized jets, it's $100 million, and it goes up from there. So, obviously we want to prevent these things from happening, but you also, should have the insurance to back you. We do have some background noise, BJ. I don't know if that's on my side.
Oh, sorry, that could be mine. Let me just mute here, Sonny, and then let's do.
Okay. All right. Now, looking at ICAO's safety report, which came out last month, September 2024, ICAO looked back at all the accidents in 2023 that they're aware of, and their data shows that, when you look left to right, turbulence is a number one issue for non-fatal accidents. When you look at fatal accidents, you have one category that they identified as the category that's killing people, and it's lost control in flight. There were no other categories they offered, because apparently 2023, in ICAO's perspective, in their data crunching and analysis, we had a year where no other fatal accidents occurred other than in loss of control in flight. Next slide. So when you're looking at decision-making time, and you're trying to crunch numbers, and you're like, I'm not sure if I can really make the case here to talk to my boss or my bosses and say we need to spend the money, because if we do, this is a return on investment. I can add a dollar figure to that. Well, a lot of times you can't do that. It's almost difficult or impossible to compute a real number, on this event. But we know it's happening, and we know it could happen. So you look at it qualitatively, and you just ask yourself that: what are we doing to prevent this? Are there any single point failures, and how resilient is our system to prevent this? Next. So if we look at the quantitative analysis once again, if we do nothing at all, the potential is a catastrophic event. And even at the lowest likelihoods, you're still in moderate risk. Well, moderate risk, according to safety risk management principles, say you're not supposed to continue doing that unless you apply mitigation strategies. You always have to apply mitigation strategies to a moderate risk. You don't just accept it, right? Now, if you apply mitigation strategies and you're still in moderate risk after the mitigation strategies, then you can accept that if you want to, but you have to do something reasonable and professional. Okay, next. So when we look at qualitative, one of my favorite techniques is the bow tie. So when you look at loss control in flight, which is the upset event where you've lost control, you have these precursors coming into that potential. And in the case of that I gave you with the business jet hitting the jet stream, we had wind shear from the jet stream. We had flight level change mode being used. We had lack of situation awareness, low speed event, relatively speaking, all that coming in together at this one time. Now, proper training, to include UPRT training, can prevent these type of precursors from stacking up to the point where you could prevent a loss control event by effective UPRT training. The great thing about UPRT training also, you can reduce the consequence of a loss control in flight. It doesn't have to result in a catastrophic event. No, you can have the proper training and skills to make it a successful recovery. And if you're not that competent, at least you can recover via a botched recovery. You can't have, maybe I could have added another consequence out there as a skillful recovery, but and probably should have. But the point here is, in this picture, you can do something about this qualitatively that will address the precursor threats and the the consequences after the upset. Next. Another way that I like to use is the barrier analysis. Everybody's seen this, I'm sure, the Swiss cheese model, but the barrier analysis, or the Swiss cheese model, is a great way to do a qualitative analysis too on what can we do, and also what went wrong, those kind of things. And in the case there of the example I gave you, we can look at what to the degree to which the organization provided adequate training, tools for risk assessment, what's their culture like. In the workplace, you consider that like the team environment. How's the CRM? How's the actual CRM, not just the CRM training, but how are their risk assessments tools being used, like the habits, and their pre-flight briefings, and so forth and so on. But you see that in the last few layers there, one of them is training. And training is I won't call it like a silver bullet, but training oftentimes is a viable and effective professional way to address a risk. And in this case, definitely UPRT and effective CRM training is a way to go, as well as effective training on how to use viable risk assessment tools. Next. So the value of safety risk management. Don't just go quantitative, blend in your qualitative analysis as well, and do the right thing. Qualitative comes down to that. When the numbers don't make sense to you, or the numbers don't tell you a clear and quick story, like, hey, you need to fix the fence. It's going to cost $5,000. But if you fix it, you're not going to have any more deer walk across your runway and damage that $20 million jet. That's an easy one to do, right? But for loss control in flight, those numbers don't become readily apparent so quickly. And so it's like, okay, let's look at it qualitatively. And when you do, it's like, yeah, the right thing to do is right there on the paper in front of us. We have some work to do here, folks. So it's back to you, BJ.
Great. Wonderful, Sonny. That's good. So they've just decided to do our landscaping out here at APS. So I think they've gone away with their blower. So hopefully you're not hearing that background.
No, it's all good.
Before I jump into mine, you can see I've highlighted the sections under there that I'm going to talk about. But Sonny, thank you for giving that presentation. I think it really helps decision makers to look at it in multiple ways, and because sometimes it's not easy to make the case. But at the end of the day, we don't want to have the 20/20 hindsight on millions of dollars of damage and many lives lost, saying woulda, coulda, shoulda. And so it's really just important to follow the SMS process, and what I will say, the mastering aviation risk process, and be proactive, to take these things very, very seriously. I will mention, first off, everybody in the audience, great to see everybody here. Feel free to ask questions. But Sonny, you talked about making a global impact. We have folks not only from Texas and from locally here in Arizona and across the United States. We also have Uganda, we have Italy, we have people from around the world joining us today. So it's really nice to see that with everybody here. Wonderful. Please go ahead, put questions in, and we'll get to those. I'm just going to run through here how APS now assists in this process. You can see that our first item here is the targeted safety risk management process. In other words, how do we now mitigate the risk for that operator or that jet that Sonny talked about that got upset at altitude and they realize, I think we really need to address not only improve training for managing the systems, but to deal with this event should it happen. So we're not guessing at how to recover or how to solve the situation that develops. Okay. So kind of back to the data, I'm going to use the airline one because it's it allows to see the dramatic. Well, I think we all would agree that the airline industry is one of the safest industries in the world, certainly. And you can see that it's a very, very serious risk. And they really want to implement a paradigm shift. And the question always is, well, how is that even possible? This has been dominating the statistics for years upon years upon years. Well, back in 2014, 40 organizations, 80 experts around the world got together and created what's called the ICAO Manual on Upset Prevention and Recovery Training. And it's a very robust process to actually drive this down. Now, I have to acknowledge and shout out to the regulators, both at ICAO, which is really more of an oversight organization, with the national aviation authorities. They have done their part in putting excellent information out in the industry. The problem with loss of control in flight is you're now being asked to mitigate something that you've never actually mitigated before. And while you know what to do, you don't necessarily know how to do it. So to drive the paradigm shift, it's really, really important for the industry to take a new look at it, not just doing what they've been doing before under a new name. So let's go ahead and talk about an example of a major industry player that did exactly that, that went out there and implemented a paradigm shift implementation of upset prevention and recovery training. So here we have the case study by Delta Airlines. They did a 5-year study after their implementation of UPRT with APS. And it's been really interesting to see the outcomes. And in fact, you all can actually go and watch Captain Brian Sims' on-demand session that he did as part of the 2023 UPRT Safety Summit at that QR code. There's no forms you got to fill out, nothing else. You're not going into our database. Just go right to the event and you can watch it. And it was a process of using FOQA data to understand what happened, ASAP data to understand the context of it, to really help them really see what was happening in their fleet, and using that information to understand what's going on, then making operational decisions. But what they saw over 5 years and 5 million flights, as a credit to not only the UPRT program, but the management and leadership at Delta Airlines itself, is a 50% reduction in precursor airplane upset conditions. Now, to put that in perspective, that's awareness and prevention alone. That's not the recovery. This is now, it's one of those implementations that permeates the entire training system. So if you think about that big red bar that we saw, they drove it down by 50% by putting a comprehensive program in place. So for those safety risk managers out there, those pilots that are interested in safety risk management, Brian Sims does what I had told Sonny, really a master class, I believe, in how to operationally implement safety risk management at a major airline, which is really directly transferable to anybody from the single pilot operator to the flight department. So please go and have a look at it. But it's great proof of concept that it can be done if it's done well with intention. All right. So relatively quickly here, let me just go ahead and run through how that was accomplished by Delta Airlines. The way it's approached is a standard that APS freely released to the industry back in 2019 called the Every Pilot in Control Solution Standard. And what it is it actually optimizes all 5 key areas of implementing a transformative or paradigm shift upset training program. And it starts with the instructors. The instructors have to have specialized knowledge, not only in training, but how to teach in the areas where historically the industry has never taught. Now, this is in direct alignment with the ICAO manual on upset training. It requires an integrated program, not just academics, not just simulation, and not just on aircraft, but an integration of all 3 together. Then the right amount of training, the intensity of training. Sonny and I talked about how to create a resilient skill set in crisis for a pilot. It takes a few days and multiple flights. Then not only just doing regulatory minimums under number 4, but implementing best practices and using the right platforms to accomplish that, which I'm going to get to in just a minute. So what we found over the years that there's what we call 8 critical loss of control and flight mitigation criteria. There are 8 main factors that need to be addressed in a robust program, and they've been put in the order of priority. Now, it's kind of interesting when you look at it. There are many things that matter, but you'll notice that representative control, feel, and response is at the bottom. Now, remember, this is a top 8. It's not that it doesn't matter. It just matters less than the other ones when it comes to mitigating this particular threat. The top areas are essentially the pilot, the human factors, their ability to function in an environment that they've never functioned in before, and having a plan of action on how to take effective action. So those are the 8 critical criteria that have to be affected in an effective program. So as we turn on what we call EPIC S2, Every Pilot in Control, it drives a few outcomes. And here's what ends up happening. You can see traditionally on the right, aeronautical decision making. You can see SRM, CRM, flight path management. You can see threat and error management. What the implementation of effective UPRT does, it installs those green circles: improved upset awareness, improved upset prevention, and should it ever arise, upset recovery. But as I always say, the very best airplane upset recovery is never being there in the first place. The hallmark of effective upset training is awareness and prevention. So what does that mean to the industry? Well, right now, this is what's happening on every flight, is that the crew is carrying around a certain level of competency in upset awareness, prevention, and recovery. And what a loss of control in flight event is defined as is an extreme manifestation of a deviation from the intended flight path. So every pilot, every organization is carrying around a bubble of competencies that you can see wrapped around the airplane. What an effective program does, like for example, what Delta Airlines did, it just puts this on steroids. It enhances that capability dramatically. Now you're going to see that not only does it mitigate the deviations on the right, but most importantly, it expands the awareness and the prevention capability of the crew. Let me just pause there for a second, Sonny. Did you have anything you wanted to add to this, or do you want me to just continue?
I put myself on mute. Sorry about that. You know what I mentioned earlier before we went online here. I just find it fascinating the degree to which you and your team go into this. It's such a professional, educational, and training opportunity and experience. To include talking about the Buffett boundary. Professional pilots don't talk enough about that. We're up at altitudes where the Buffett boundary is significant. We get close to it. Sometimes we don't even know it. Just that kind of awareness can really help expand that bubble, so to speak.
It's true, and it's one of those areas where that increased knowledge. So effective UPRT should complement the existing training system. It shouldn't be changing it. It shouldn't be replacing anything. And the beauty of the regulators putting great guidance out there is that an effectively implemented UPRT program should be exactly that, designed to complement the industry. Very often, unfortunately, is kind of everybody has their own way of doing things. Well, here what we do is, you don't find that at APS. What we do is, this is the industry guidance. This is what they expect. Here's how you optimally implement it to mitigate the risk. So it complements the training you're getting every time you go to initial, every time you go to recurrent. It just takes that and gives perspective at another dimension to it. So from there, when we take a look at this particular process, that's the outcome. But very often people ask, well, what are the tools to accomplish that? Well, we have what we call the degree of contribution of UPRT platforms. And interestingly enough, it is now the combination of academics on aircraft training, simulation, and even some cases virtual reality. But it's always interesting to see that little sliver of unmitigated risk up there. There's always a residual risk. And depending on what pilots or industry members accomplish, that can be small or it can be the entire circle, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. So it's the leveraging of his existing solutions. So I think that's an analogy to the mastering aviation risk concept. The silver bullets exist and are available now. Also, to overcome the risk of loss of control in flight, the solutions are available and exist now using readily available resources and assets. And this is, for example, the size of the pie pieces represents the capability of these particular areas to mitigate the risk. Now, one thing to take away from this, which we'll talk about in a minute, academics alone can't solve the problem. Okay, on aircraft, UPRT alone can't solve the problem. Simulation alone can't solve the problem. And for sure, virtual reality can't. But the best is the integration of all of this together with a complementary program that transfers skills between platforms. Okay, so what does that look like? Well, we take that contribution of platforms and now we relate it to the existing loss of control and flight threat, which you can see is dominant. So to give perspective on it, we can see now, if we consider that risk as unacceptable, the existing use of those particular areas we would call marginally mitigated risk at APS. We need to do something about that column. How do we use the readily available resources to drive it down just like Delta Airlines did, because their instructors go through a fully integrated program of on-aircraft simulation and academics specialized to the process to be able to go back to their air carrier to drive that down with 15,000 pilots. Okay, so just as a reminder, here's the diagram that looks a little bit different than Sunny's. The point now is not so much where the square exists. As Sunny talked about, the design of this particular matrix is by each operator individually. It's unique to how they operate and they identify risk. But the goal here is that arrow that we see. We want to be driving the arrow from an intolerable risk down to acceptable risk in the green area. That's the ultimate goal of the safety risk management process. So what we want to do now is take that red circle and start filling in the pie pieces. So what that looks like as we proceed from left to right, where we go from marginally mitigated risk all the way to the right of maximum LOCI mitigation, you can see now the circle is red because of the graphic below it that we already looked at. It's that big bar on the left. So as we now start integrating the loss of control and flight mitigation criteria, leveraging the every pilot in control solution standard to drive the risk down to a tolerable or acceptable risk, what requires is the integration now of those various platforms. We can see now as we add simulation, we've removed some of the red, but not all of it. If we just add on aircraft training, we've removed a little bit more of the red, but not all of it. It's not until we arrive at an integrated program where we're really actually driving down and mitigating the risk. And then, of course, ultimately, we want to use all available resources. And so at APS, we actually have different levels of implementation. These are what we call our UPRT mastery standards. The first level is bronze, silver, gold, then platinum. So it's a design program. And the cool part that I like about the mastery program is very often flight departments will show up and say, we know exactly what we want. And as APS, the provider, we will deliver that. We just feel that it is our calling, our responsibility to say, what is the likely outcome of the program you've selected? And if they choose, for example, bronze or they choose silver, when they arrive and go through the program, they very often realize that they're leaving risk on the table unnecessarily. So when they come back for recurrent, they just fill in the pie pieces to really transition from, for example, a bronze UPRT mastery into a gold pro UPRT mastery to make sure that they're mitigating their risk. So as we see in our recurrent program, one of our last bullets is what do we see? We see a dramatic improvement on initial training. We did 3-month research on 135 pilots to see that the competency level of pilots when it comes to dealing with a startling airplane upset is about 20 to 40%. After the program, it rockets up to 90-some%. We had to test before training and then after training to prove the mitigation happened during the training. It atrophies over time. We typically recommend UPRT every year, but the reality is flight departments only come back every 2 to 3 years. But the great news is while the first intense program is 3 days, the recurrent program is just 1 day. But have a look at that recurrent 1, 2, 3. In 1 day, not only do they top up to where they were, but often above where they were. And it's interesting, real brief story on that, because I see we have some questions. I asked one of our military operators who had been through the program 9 times in his 18-year career with APS. And I said, so, Mark, are you learning more and more? And his answer really, it put it all in perspective for me. He goes, no, BJ, I'm forgetting less and less. And so it was really interesting to see that return of competency very quickly. But you can see the terminal level of atrophy goes higher and higher over the years. So with that, Sunny, first off, any comments on my section, what I talked about before we go to questions? Sunny, I know that was a fairly long transmission. There's a lot of information in there, but I just wanted to make sure we address the UPRT integration and risk mitigation for loss of control.
No, BJ, I do see some questions there, and I think we have just not too much time left, so I don't want to take up that opportunity to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first one I want to bring up here is the one for Wyvern. Okay, it's from Scott. Does Wyvern use some type of maturity index to assess where operators fall in various SMS competency?
We do. We utilize the Safety Management International Collaborations Group set of tools to evaluate the level of culture an operator or organization has, and the level of performance for the SMS. It's a very sophisticated set of indices, using your term there, I think. And so, it looks in like 78 different dimensions in the SMS, and each of those dimensions have 4 levels. So you can see right away as you build out doing the assessment using these tools, the graphs build automatically. So at the end of the exercise, you can see where your yellows and reds are that you need to address.
Excellent. Great. And then Scott has another comment, really not really a question. And I think this is really important always to put it in perspective. I know whenever I'm presenting, especially when I'm on a panel like with the FAA and other organizers, I say very often when all you have is a hammer, you see everything as a nail, right? And I think this kind of puts it in perspective. This training is great for knowledge or skill deficits. And I would, I would submit that also for generating overall resilience in crisis. But I think the point that he makes is there are many other factors that affect human performance, which of course there are. And I think that the solution for the industry when it comes to mitigating risk is just doing the best we can with the resources that we have. But there's that never-ending process, Sonny, of continuing to evolve the SMS based on, as you mentioned, new threats popping up, new hazards popping up, risks that were unmitigated, and feedback from the organization itself. So any comments on this, Sonny, for you with your background in human factors and management?
Yeah, I'd like for us to do a webinar in the future about something like this. I can show with a presentation I've done recently where, when it comes to human performance, NASA, the Aviation Safety Reporting System shows that, lack of situational awareness, lack of effective communication are the top 2 human performance problems out there. And where fatigue is way down on the list. Not that fatigue is not an issue, it certainly is, but we're not talking enough about effective communication and lack of situational awareness. And I have a presentation that you and I could talk about and share maybe with the team, with your team and our team, and provide to the industry, where you can connect the dots with emotional intelligence, with effective communication, safety culture, behavioral anticipation, human behavior, and all the way around this 5-point grid. And emotional intelligence is connected to all of them. And not that emotional intelligence has anything specifically or directly to do with loss control flight. It certainly does not. But indirectly, these things affect our situational awareness and our communication capabilities.
Well, Sonny, thank you for that. I know that Scott is happy with your answers. He's commented back already, so very good. I'm glad we got to a couple questions today, but to your point, I see we're running out of time. I just wanted to thank everybody out there that joined us today, and the many hundreds, sometimes thousands of people that watch this later on demand after the event is over. We just appreciate all of your passion and safety and what you each do to improve safety and to save lives. We know that it's an industry-wide effort, and we're happy to help support that in every way we can as both Wyvern and APS. So thank you all. And Sonny, I'm looking forward to seeing you next week in Las Vegas. That'll be exciting. It's always fun to be beside Wyvern. But thank you for your time and your expertise and your passion and your commitment to safety and joining us all today.
Yep, it's a pleasure always. Thanks, BJ.
Great. Okay, with that, unless you have any final words of wisdom, Sonny, you'd like to share with everybody before we go, we're going to wrap it up. So over to you for the final comment, sir.
Oh, well, thank you, BJ. I think the thing that comes to mind right away is, I've been inspired by BJ and the APS team for many years. In fact, my team can attest to that. When we're working on something, I said, let's call APS and see how they do it, because your pursuit of professionalism and everything you do really inspires the Wyvern team, and we endeavor to do the same. So it really is about professionalism and being passionate about what you believe in, and I know there's no doubt about that at APS.
Well, I would say the exact same thing in reverse, Sonny. So, thank you guys for being there. Thank you for being passionate and open and continuing to evolve your services. Just since the time I've known you, you've completely transformed how you support the industry and the tools you provide for it. So with that, again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sonny. We're going to depart here today, and we look forward to the next event we have together, whenever that is, Sonny.
All right. Sounds good.